All right, turning now to politics. It's been a relatively quiet weekend on the campaign trail as Kamala Harris and Donald Trump recalibrate ahead of the final sprint to Election Day, which is now 72 days away. The past 6 weeks in American politics has been a whirlwind. Neither candidate has any public events scheduled between now and Wednesday. On Wednesday, Harris and Tim Walz will reunite for a bus tour through Georgia. Trump heads to Michigan and Wisconsin on Thursday. Both campaigns are taking a brief pause ahead of that next phase of the race. The first debate between Harris and Trump is happening in just 16 days, and that's going to shift the focus of both candidates' agendas and policy priorities. Last week's Democratic convention offered a preview of the issues that are likely to be central to Harris's campaign and how she intends to position herself against Donald Trump. Harris's keynote speech on Thursday night emphasized her middle-class upbringing. She vowed that building out the middle class is going to be, quote, a defining goal of her presidency. At the convention, she received fierce endorsements from the leaders of a number of top labor unions, including Shawn Fain, the president of the United Auto Workers Union, who called Trump a scab during his speech at the DNC. The UAW recently filed federal labor charges against Trump and the billionaire entrepreneur Elon Musk after the former president suggested during an interview with Musk that striking workers should be fired, which is kind of illegal. Trump's anti-union stance is consistent with Chapter 18 of this, Project 2025, which is a radical blueprint for the next Republican presidential administration. This was drafted by the Heritage Foundation with the involvement of a lot of people who worked in the Trump administration. Project 2025 seeks to make it easier to disband unions, to weaken worker protections, including workplace safety standards and anti-discriminatory practices. That's the alternative that Trump and his allies have in mind. The two candidates' visions could not be more different. Of the policies Harris has rolled out so far, her plans to tackle the country's housing crisis is the most fleshed out. She's called for the construction of 3 million new housing units over the next 4 years, which she intends to achieve by offering tax incentives for home builders. Harris has also offered a proposal for a $40 billion innovation fund to encourage local governments to find solutions for better housing. She plans to help first-time homeowners by buying homes by offering up to $25,000 in down payment assistance. She also supports legislation that would prevent investors from buying up large numbers of rental properties and to stop corporate landlords from colluding to raise rental prices. Her economic agenda also includes plans to restore and expand the child tax credit in order to provide some much-needed relief for families. And she seeks to do the same thing with the Earned Income Tax Credit to help individuals and couples with lower income jobs who don't have kids. Now, all of that is in stark contrast to Trump's signature first-term tax cuts, which helped the wealthy more than they helped anyone else. Harris's economic plan also includes an effort to relieve Americans of the high cost of health care. She seeks to build on some of the Biden administration's achievements, including capping the cost of insulin at $35, not just for seniors on Medicare, but for everyone. She says she'll allow Medicare to accelerate the schedule with which it can negotiate drug prices in order to bring down the cost of more prescription drugs sooner. Harris also vows to work with states to help millions of Americans cancel their medical debt, which can lead some people to bankruptcy simply because they had the misfortune of getting sick. This is a far cry from the health-related policy priorities of Project 2025, which is much more interested in restricting access to medication abortion, stripping the Centers for Disease Control of their power to offer the public warnings and guidance on health-related matters. Project 2025 could also lead to millions of Americans losing their health care coverage altogether. The Heritage Foundation's radical manifesto includes a proposal to impose a lifetime cap on Medicaid benefits, which by one estimate could result in 18.5 million Americans losing coverage. It's a lot to unpack here. Joining me now is Kathleen Sebelius. She's the former Secretary of Health and Human Services, the former Democratic governor of Kansas. Governor, good to see you. Thank you for being with us.
Nice to see you, Alan.
Look, I don't bring it up with a lot of people because I don't have a lot of former Health and Human Services secretaries here. But Heritage Foundation seems very compelled to change the name of the department to the Department of Life, which sounds good and innocuous, except it's all sort of centered around reproductive rights and taking them away from women. So that is a central aspect. We don't bring it up because it's not in the health care portion of this book, but that's central to Project 2025.
Well, I think you could look at Project 2025's goals as going after the health of women, not just in the reproductive health area, which you have mentioned, and shifting the whole focus of HHS, but actually Medicaid is a predominantly women's program, and restricting Medicaid benefits would affect millions of women. The Affordable Care Act repeal, which Project 2025 advocates, would affect 21 million people who signed up this year, the majority of whom are women. So we're not just talking about reproductive health, we're talking about all health. And this is an effort, and as Coach Wall said, if they draw up a playbook, you can believe they're going to use it. And Donald Trump has been after the Affordable Care Act since he was elected president the first time. It affects every state in the country. It affects the 40 states who have expanded Medicaid coverage. It affects 21 million people and would devastate the healthcare system in the United States.
Let's stick on abortion for a second, because Project 2025 has very specific things, including the fact that more than half of all abortions in this country are now medication abortions. On NBC's Meet the Press just moments ago, Kristen Welker interviewed J.D. Vance, and she asked him about Donald Trump's stance on a national abortion ban. There's some tricky language in here. Let's listen to what he said.
Can you commit, Senator, sitting right here with me today, that if you and Donald Trump are elected, that you will not impose a federal ban on abortion?
I can absolutely commit that, Kristen. And Donald Trump has been as clear about that as possible.
But would he veto it?
Yeah, I mean, if you're not supporting it as the President of the United States, you fundamentally have to veto it.
So he would veto a federal abortion ban?
I think he would. He said that explicitly, that he would.
Governor J.D. Vance talks to Donald Trump much more than we do, so maybe he knows things we don't. Donald Trump's waffled on this an awful lot, but he uses coded language. He talks about giving it back to the states. And when you compare giving it back to the states, or when you combine that with the language in here that will bring back the Comstock, or use the Comstock Act to prevent the mailing not just of mifepristone, but also contraceptives, you're going to have a de facto situation where women in Michigan, in California, in Massachusetts, in New York are going to have difficulty getting reproductive health care under Project 2025, with or without a national abortion ban.
I think that's right. I think, first of all, you go after the abortion drugs, mifepristone, which has been not only wildly effective, it is incredibly safe, it is easy to use, it has been on the market for decades. And start with that, with the Comstock Act, where you couldn't mail, you couldn't, have prescribers from out of state making it available to people in abortion ban states. And then you expand that to have an abortion watch. I think they have a sort of anti-abortion czar that they would appoint, according to Project 2025, tracking women. Mm-hmm. Mandatorily asking states to report who's having miscarriages, who's having abortions. I mean, keeping really this dark list of, I don't know, it's a step toward criminalization. It's a step toward going after providers. So they may not be able to get an abortion ban through Congress, but there's a whole lot of banning that can happen through executive order, through use of the Comstock Act, through terrorizing providers in states across the country that will really shut down abortion rights no matter where you live.
What is the look, all through this document, it's infused with ideas that, generally speaking, they want to weaken government agencies, except in the cases where they want to strengthen them to advance a particular agenda. So the Homeland Security will not be about Homeland Security anymore. It will be an immigration enforcement agency. Health and Human Services will not be Health and Human Services in the broader sense that we think about it. It'll be an abortion ban enforcement agency. This talk about the Department of Life. Project 2025 is infused with religious overtones. This is one of them, where it seeps in. There are reasons why we give these agencies broad names, because Health and Human Services does a lot of stuff.
It does, Ali. It's responsible for, the Food and Drug Administration, the aging and disability departments, children and families, the major insurance programs, Medicare, Medicaid, the marketplaces, a really broad list of 12 operating agencies, and affects every American from birth to death. But I would make it really clear, these folks are really not interested in life. They are interested in forced birth. They are interested in controlling a woman's ability to make her own choices about when and if to have a family, how to live a productive life, how she and her partner and her pastor can make determinations about her own health. It is a mandatory birth right that they're interested in. They really don't care a lot about what happens once that child is born. They're not interested in expanding a family's ability to stay home with an infant for paid parental leave. They're not interested in what happens to the life of a mother when a woman who is not healthy conceives a child. This is all about forced birth, and that's a terrifying place to be.
And while that may sound like rhetoric, there are references in here to controlling contraceptives. And we've seen what Republicans, when left to their own devices, will do with IVF. So there's no other way to explain this other than how you said it, because those things are actually enumerated. Governor, good to see you. Kathleen Sebelius is the former Secretary of Health and Human Services under President Obama, former Democratic governor of Kansas.